This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Hey, I've got a favor. You like this podcast? Please go to iTunes and profess your love or profess your hate. I don't care. But go profess something. I'm real easy to find. Go to iTunes, type my last name in, Covel. The iTunes podcast will pop right up. Jot down your review. I want to hear what you have to say. This whole review process, this is 2018, how the world works. I'm not really sure I like it. In fact, I know I don't like it, but you know what? I fight the good fight, and reviews are part of the process. So I implore you to go spend a little time and jot down what you think. And also, if you've not yet seen it, my newest edition of Trend Following, I don't care what you bought 10 years ago. The newest edition of Trend Following, rewritten from the bottom up, expanded by twice the content. It's now a massive new hardcover. I'm telling you, if you want the reference, the manifesto, the book you must have, if you want to understand trend following, quantitative trading, the mindset, the psychology, the rules, the tools, the thinking, everything that goes into it, you must pick up my newest edition of Trend Following. Well, I say you must pick it up. You don't have to do anything, but I would like for you to pick it up. Sliding away from the Mike Covel advertisements, my guest today, Tarra Mitchell, her new book, The Yoga of Leadership, a practical guide to health, happiness, and inspiring total team engagement. Anyone who has listened to this show knows that I practice yoga. Oh, hold on for a second. You don't know that? Oh, you have a preconceived idea about what yoga is? You've never done it, but you think you know? Give me a break. Back in the day, we would just call you a tool if you had that view with no experience. But in all seriousness, yoga is something I must do. It drives me. It's part of my life. It's part of my, as I say on the episode with Tarra, part of my medication, so to speak. Tarra has put together this great guide, this great book with nitty-gritty detail that goes into yoga. Our conversation today is to bring everyone in to the big picture, to get people thinking about the benefits of yoga. Because look, your personal well-being is connected to everything you do. It's connected to your success. If your personal well-being is trash, guess what your success is going to be? This is about investing in you. It's about a guide for life. So let's jump right in. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Tarra Mitchell about yoga, life, and all kinds of other twists and turns. As I dig into your world, I think one of the most interesting things that the audience will find as a setup, and maybe it's a big story, maybe it's a small story. Either way, it's really interesting. Here you are going down this yoga path, and I'm going to go back in time and show this transition from the regular world to the yoga world. But here you are, you have this new book out, and you've got this fantastic endorsement that anyone that writes a business book would surely want, right? I mean, everybody would say, my gosh, if I'm writing a business book and I have the CEO, co-founder of Whole Foods give a nice ringing endorsement, that's like what everyone wants. That's like top of the heap stuff. And this is a book that has yoga in the title. So the floor is yours. Explain that.
I was thrilled when John agreed, first of all, to serve as an endorsement. I approached him, though, because I really felt that the material would resonate with him. I knew from my research that he practiced yoga and meditation, and he eats healthy, and a lot of the things that we yogis in these environments tend to do also. And the way that he runs his business is he's always run it in such a conscious way. And he recently published a book co-written by a Babson professor, Raj Sisodia, called Conscious Capitalism. And so they're building that organization out. At this point around the world, they have meetups. People get together and talk about ways to run their businesses more consciously, but still for profit, still capitalist, in keeping with capitalism. I just felt we were very like-minded, and I thought it would resonate, and he just agreed. So it was kind of luck.
There was no backstory or in channel to him. You got it across his desk and he liked it, and boom.
Right. I guess that's one of the things. I've always had the motto that you never get a yes unless you try. He's not the only CEO I approached. I did some research and I targeted some people and I wrote some captivating requests and got an agreement.
That's so cool, though. I mean, you're a first-time author, right?
I sure am. That's why I'm honored to be on your podcast here.
But I mean, it's still cool because I've talked to a lot of authors. I was fortunate early on, too, to have some really interesting people say something nice about my work. When I see other people as first-time authors, and when I see that name, I know there's a backstory. I know you did something different. I know that you were pushing in a way that sometimes people don't push. They figure, you know what? I know some people that are maybe at the C level of name recognition. They might know who the A's are, but they just don't approach them. So you had it in you to approach. Why did you have that in you to approach? What about you makes you want to say, I can get John Mackey?
What about me? I think it's about the material. I think it's that valuable.
Before the material, there's something inside you, though, that says, beyond just the quick one-liner, this isn't even a yoga question. This is more my own curiosity. There's something inside you that you've learned over your career, over your lifetime, that let you feel very comfortable making that approach.
I suppose I would say two things. First of all, I grew up, I guess, kind of scrappy. We didn't have a lot of money, so you made yourself. That requires a certain type of person to have had the successes that I have. There was constantly this putting yourself out there, swim with the sharks, learn as it comes, seeking out mentorships along the way. So I've always had that tenacity in me. Perhaps I was born that way. I think being smart enough about who you're approaching and also being able to craft a compelling message around it. I believe I touched his sort of heartstrings, so to speak, in the way that I approached him. I can only guess that that's one of the reasons why. But yeah, so I think those are probably the two biggest reasons. And I spent a lot of years, as I think you know, raising money. So I've had to approach and interact with high level, leaders for a long time. I suppose that it wasn't completely foreign to me to, try to talk to a very high level leader. See, now I don't know if you'll let me keep digging here, but I'd like to keep digging on something you said. I don't know you. We've never spoken. I'm only listening to what you're saying right now. I've been inside your book. You say, I was born with it. I could argue some detailed points to say you weren't born with it, but I would love to know if you want to go there. Give me a trigger early in life. Let's assume for a second that you weren't born with it, that you learned it. So give me the earliest trigger you can know in your life. And we're not even talking about yoga yet. I'm not even letting you get to yoga yet. I'm just fascinated by finding a really great endorsement and how you approached. How early, how young were you when you knew you had this tenacity? Was there a trigger in your teen years, your college years, something that set in motion the next couple decades of you? You got to go with what pops in your mind first. Something that pops in my mind is my first job out of undergraduate was with a company that basically processed data for consumer products goods companies. And I started out as an analyst, and then the account manager on the account was heading to another job, if I recall correctly, and advocated for me to take over his role. He was taking me around the country to meet his clients. He had to give presentations to brand managers at these global consumer products goods companies, and one was at Corporate Dial. And at that time, I had had been an analyst, so I was creating the deck, if you will, and he was doing the presentations. I think I was 24 years old. This one was in a very large boardroom with the vice president in attendance. He decided earlier, the day prior or so, that I would give the presentation. Even though I really didn't want to yet, I stood there in front of the vice president of a global multinational organization at age 24. I didn't do very well. I wouldn't say I had it all down. And I was sweating bullets up there. Luckily, the guy was there to help me field some questions, but I was unprepared. I suppose you don't know what you're going to be asked until you start being asked and really knowing all of the answers that you might need to know. And so I felt that that was an enormous learning experience that forced me to make sure that I had researched fully every possible, movement of data, and I understood kind of where that was going from. So that I think that's one story that pops into my mind as something that was, from a career perspective, invaluable.
Trial by fire.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me bring you up in time a little bit to post the financial crisis. And please take a little time to give some of your background around the financial crisis. But you made a pivot. You mentioned raising money, venture capital world, probably other financing parts of your life that I'm not familiar with. But talk about the pivot and leaving behind, because we don't necessarily need to retrace, the whole nasty period of that time. But I think a lot of people probably did some self-assessment and made some changes. But it sounds like you really said, I want nothing to do with this world anymore, and I'm out, and you made a choice. And one last thing before you start to talk about that choice, just to tell you something about me, I started doing Pilates in 2008, nothing to do with yoga. But in 2012, a trainer recommended that I start doing yoga. So I've been at pretty much twice a week, sometimes up to 5 times a week, yoga practice since 2012. Your work is like an encyclopedia of things that I don't know. But just to give you some background on me, and we will talk more, but why don't you go ahead and outline your pivot around the financial crisis to say, I'm ready for something new?
Well, first, good for you for finding yoga. I sort of think everyone will find some level of yoga in their lives as we age. The pivot, that's an interesting story. It wasn't really a pivot because I feel like it happened to me a little bit out of my control. I was working in private equity, raising capital for essentially a fund of funds for a long while, and decided that I wanted to be an entrepreneur and co-found an investment business on my own with a bunch of partners that I was an owner, and creating my own culture, which culture comes into play in my book. Really looking forward to that. A bunch of partners and I set out to do that. We had a nice strategy. We had an anchor investor in Dubai that we were closing in on, and then the global financial crisis hit. Their portfolio kind of tanked, and we lost their commitment. Shortly thereafter, it became very clear that this new venture of ours was not going to get off the ground. I also, at the time, was pregnant with my first child and decided that I wasn't going to try to fight this recession and get this fund off the ground. I'll just have my baby. I found myself then in a position with a new baby. I had resigned from my other very good job, and my new kind of venture wasn't going to happen. The pivot, in a way, to use your word, kind of happened to me, and I know this story, I'm sure, is very common among many people. Then, after learning how to change a diaper, I spent some time doing some consulting work and working with other companies during the financial crisis, and decided that I wanted to pursue something that was more of a hobby. And I've always been into exercise, fitness, nutrition, yoga. And it's always been a thread through my life. In fact, I worked at a fitness club when I was 16 years old, and I've been a gym rat, as I call myself, ever since. I decided, though, I was most curious about yoga, and it was becoming an increasingly important part of my weekly routine. And so I decided to get yoga teacher training because, to your point earlier about my book being an encyclopedia, it is a reference tool. It has a lot of information in it, and what I was frustrated by was that the only way to deepen your yoga practice and learn more about yoga was by taking these year-long teacher trainings. There didn't really seem to be the way to do that. I signed up for teacher training, not really intending to be a yoga teacher, but just merely to learn for my own health and well-being. During the process of the teacher training, upon graduation, in fact, we were to talk about, now that we had all this knowledge, what we're going to use it for. And there's a very important part of being a yoga teacher, and this idea of giving back. What he wanted to hear from us, Rolf Gates was my teacher, he wanted to hear from us how we were going to use our yoga to give back and contribute back. And at the time, I had still felt, and I still do in a lot of ways, more of a businesswoman than a yogi.
No, come on. I can't hear that in your voice. Come on.
I know. I'm always the black sheep. I'm always the black sheep. I think I like it. Contrarian, a little bit odd, put myself into weird situations. But so I'm in this yoga world. And so I basically said when I received my little certificate that I was going to give yoga back to the business world in some way. I didn't know how I was going to do it. That's who I thought could use this information and use what I learned, and it would benefit them too. I'm going to take it outside of the studio. That's kind of the pivot period. That was kind of where that shift happened.
And that just became, you started teaching, and then eventually that led to putting the book together.
Essentially, I then was relocated from the Boston area to Virginia, and I decided to keep studying yoga. So I enrolled in my next teacher training because I had some unanswered questions, and I'm a need-to-know kind of person. And it was part of my advanced yoga teacher training with a studio in Virginia called Beloved Yoga that I had to actually create a thesis to demonstrate that what we had learned, we understood in some fashion. And I had it in my mind to write a book for a while. I just felt like I wanted to put some of this, assimilate it into my own, say, manifesto that was for me, that it was useful for me to reflect upon as time went on, but also would be valuable to other people. I asked if I could submit a few chapters of an initial draft of a book for my thesis, and they agreed, and that's kind of what kicked off the book process. And I did start teaching because I decided that I had learned so much and I needed to assimilate it, so let me teach it, and through teaching you learn, and that's kind of how I started teaching.
So I'm probably the type of student that a lot of teachers, and this probably goes back to when I was a kid, a lot of teachers probably just get very frustrated with me, but I will jump into subjects and I will figure something out. I will get something from it. And like for yoga, I will continue to use it. But I would have to say, going through your work, there's so much in yoga that I don't know. I've talked about yoga on this podcast for a long time, but I usually don't get into a lot of the details. And this is probably some of the things that I'm going to ask you about today are probably the most details I've ever presented on this podcast. But to give some flavor to people, I have been trying to get other males. I'm about 6 foot, 185, 190 pounds. I'm in really good shape. In my late 40s, I can do the splits. I can do a handstand. I try to get other males to go this direction. And the things I just mentioned were the physical part, and there's obviously a lot more to yoga than that. And that's not even what really triggered me, and I'll go into that in a second. But I try to get so many males to consider. And for some reason, I don't know if it's the name, the connotation, what they think it means, what they think it implies, but I've literally had zero success as far as I know in my regular life to get other males to go this direction. And I don't know why. I've had very little success. So I thought, well, let's do a podcast on this. Let's get everybody, really thinking about it. But one last thought I want to throw out there, and this is what I really want you to start with. When I first got into yoga, I was only doing it one time a week. I was doing it with a one-on-one teacher. I was brand new. We were outside on a grassy area near the water in San Diego. And when I switched to doing it twice a week, I remember something started to shift in me. And what would shift in me is when I was done, I would go back and sit down and literally feel like I was drunk for hours. This kind of state of mind that you just, look, we're going to talk about it some today, but that state of mind, I just kept enjoying that feeling. And then over time, I mentioned the handstands and the splits. Over time, you start to see some physical benefits that come along with it too. But at first, it was just the interior feeling for me. So anyways, that's a little bit of a setup for me. But what do you think about the fact that it's very difficult to get males to consider yoga?
So the funny thing is that up until the turn of the century, women were not even allowed to do yoga in India. It was Krishnamacharya that democratized the practice and allowed women to even do it. So the funny thing is, for all these thousands of years, it was really a men's thing. The reason, though, I think, to your question in today's world is that it's now become this practice that a lot of women do, here in the Western world at least, that tends to involve a lot of flexibility. And so my suspicion is that the men largely see it as this sort of stretchy class, and they want something more kind of hardcore, is my guess. I have had my husband, who's kind of a CrossFitter type athlete, come to some of my classes, and he used to lead some other trainings, and he took some of my some of the poses, if you will, that we did in class and brought them to his traditional exercise class because it's challenging. It was core work. I think it's probably multiple reasons. A lot of men just don't see it as a form of exercise that they need until they have some kind of a ache or pain that a doctor is recommending that they get some flexibility from. But the part of yoga that's, as you know, probably from looking at the book, that's of most interest to me is that the internal piece that you referred to, the mind part of the whole practice. I think if there was a better awareness as to that, why that benefits you, then perhaps you'll see more men doing it for their own mental benefits, not so much their physical health.
I've spent the majority of the last 5 years in an Asian country practicing yoga primarily with Asian women and occasionally the random white guy that shows up who thinks maybe I can do this class. It is a combination of flexibility and strength and the ability to concentrate and stay in it. I don't see many guys that can do it, but I keep trying to get people to think about it. Let's start to kind of tear this apart because you really do get into some nitty gritty. Let's talk about, one of the big things, and this is just a simplified way of saying it, how you would say it. Yoga allows us at a very base level to be better, calmer, more positive. I feel this in myself going back over many years now. I have a hard time getting angry about much. Occasionally I'll give a rant about something on this podcast, but I don't find myself getting angry. And I don't know. I think the only thing I can really attribute that to is the yoga practice going back over the last 6 years.
Yeah, that's right. I think, and so I have a yoga practice and a meditation practice, and that really I found to be very helpful. But yoga is funny. I was just teaching a master class in the DC area last weekend, and it was to leaders. And if you think about, there's what I called a thread that goes through yoga, one way to think about it, and that lends itself to your health and your experience, is that we move on the mat to release tension in our body, and that tension release is relaxing to our nervous system. And then we also breathe in a way. We practice breathing, pranayama. We practice breathing in a way that also settles our nervous system. And when we bring our nervous system to a calmer place, the mind quiets. So all of the activity, the thoughts, the to-do lists that are happening just get a little less loud. And you start to settle into the practice. Sometimes some say it takes 20 minutes in today's world to start to settle into the practice. And once the mind starts to quiet, it's only when the mind is quiet that we can tap into what I refer to as the knowledge layer, the upper mind, where we can make helpful, healthy choices for ourselves, where we can be more discerning about how we spend the time in our days and how the people that we spend our time with and the decisions that we make in our work. And we can just operate with more clarity. All of this then leads to a greater satisfaction in life when we're making choices that are helpful to our well-being, to our happiness, to our leadership, to our ability to engage our teams. And it leads to success. So that's kind of the thread that going to a yoga practice, can lead you through, or a meditation practice.
Let me throw something on top of that. So when I go to a yoga practice, sometimes I come in very relaxed state and it's very easy to quiet the mind. And when I say quiet the mind, you say quiet the mind, maybe you have a different way of saying it. But, if you go to a yoga practice and you're thinking about other stuff, whatever that other stuff might be, relationship, job, career, whatever, at what point in time does and I'm talking yoga right now, not necessarily meditation, but at what point in time does the physical yoga practice take your mind to a place where it can no longer think? I like to think of it myself sometimes that if I show up and there's too much on my mind, it's like a battle. The battle is, okay, the teacher is leading me here. My mind is over here. The mind keeps trying to stay in front of the practice, not pay attention to the practice, whatever. But at some point in time, it gives up. I've not figured out exactly how it gives up. But where I want you to run with that as I give you that setup, and this is a line straight from your work, yoga is the practice of becoming conscious. Elaborate on that. Explain what you mean when you say that.
To your point, your original point about the practice, it's not really a science as to exactly when your mind will quiet, if you will, but there's this ongoing process of breathing, paying attention, hand placement, the cues, where you're constantly trying to bring I'll call it the monkey mind, the frazzled mind, the distracted mind, back to what you're doing, and like you said, in time starts to settle, and I believe it's at the time when your nervous system starts to settle and you begin to become relaxed. So it really depends on how worked up you are to begin with whenever you step foot into a class, and as to how long it will take to get there. You are paying greater attention to the details in your life and what you're doing, why you're doing it. It's a process of sort of self-examination and self-reflection so that you can make choices that are wise, discerning, and that will help you with your own happiness and satisfaction in life. So expanding consciousness, you're moving from a place of being in this state of reaction where the mind is noisy and you're reacting to your life. You mentioned in your podcast recently on information, we're in an age of information overload where we've got little bits and bytes just feeding our mind, and we don't have, and with life moving too fast, if we don't have any of that downtime, that quiet time to step back, then we have all of this coming at us, and it's just coming, and it's just filling our mind, and we don't have any time to digest it. I call it life indigestion in my book. You have this indigestion. You can't process what is even happening, let alone make wise, conscious choices.
Yoga is right there, at least in my experience. It's part of my routine. I don't define it like you do in print. I like to read when someone defines it better than the way I define it, but it's just become part of my routine to where I know that it gets rid of that intellectual indigestion. It eliminates it. It makes it go away. It's like magic.
Yeah, and on my slides last week, I said it's magic. That's funny that you say that. It is like magic, and that's one reason why I decided I wanted to get the first teacher training way back when, because I was in my classes, in the class, and I loved this class I took while I was working in private equity. I would take it every week. I longed for it. I needed it. I wanted to hear this woman's words, and it was like she was putting a spell on me. I was like, what is she doing that is making me think differently, that is making me feel better? I was like, what exactly is she doing? And so I sought out to figure it out. Like, what exactly is going on here that's making these things happen? I mean, we can call it magic, but it's yoga. It just brings us to a place of greater consciousness.
Let me jump you around on some topics. I don't want to give the disclaimer too many times. Your work is dense. As you describe your original background pre-yoga, I guess it would not surprise people, as you say, as an analyst background, it's written like an analyst would have written it. It's got detail. I think people that like to understand the nuts and bolts, it's there. They might not all come across in a podcast episode, but it's all there. One of the things that I like, though, is some of the ways that you contrast. And, look, so many people go through life thinking, oh, I'm not lucky, or, oh, that person is lucky. And the way I like that you phrase that is there's a difference between if you want to go down that path, and this is all part of yoga, if you want to go down that path of talking about luck, okay, luck is involved in life, but that doesn't do any good, right? So the best way, and this is right from your work, is to have that clear intention purposefully aligned with life, a clear intention. If you have a clear intention, look, there still might be something lucky or unlucky that happens, but when you have a clear intention, when you have a purpose, you let go of just worrying about whether something is lucky or unlucky. You take ownership.
You do, and you sort of manifest your own life experience. You're talking about the chapter on intention setting, which we often do at the beginning of a yoga class anyway, set an intention just to be deliberate about the fact that for the next hour, hour and a half, you're focused on you on the mat and intentionally trying not to focus on what you have to do next or what had happened prior. Oftentimes we set an intention like that to be present. Setting an intention and alignment, I like that the word alignment, aligning your life towards that intention. So depending on what you want to do, if you create alignment in your life, you figure out what you want to do, you start talking about what you want to do, you're sharing it with others, and knowing where you're headed, aligning the component parts that will allow you to kind of manifest what you want, is oftentimes within your control. And so that's the alignment, the life alignment piece, so to sort of manifest what you want out of your life.
It seems like so much of yoga, and again, I feel like a babe in the woods here trying to talk with someone who has as much experience and knowledge as you do, but just to generalize a little bit, and having lived in a Buddhist country, you can see the parallels, right? There's a connection to the Eastern traditions, obviously with the India foundation, but I don't think for so many of us, and I grew up in a standard issue situation in the States, but I don't think a lot of us, enough of us, unless perhaps we are fortunate enough to have somebody in our family that came from a part of the world where some of these mindfulness traditions exist. It's not the way that most of us come up in the States, is it?
Yeah, that was part of the challenge also, because especially as leaders in the Western world, which is who I'm speaking to, we look for answers and facts to make our decisions from, and it has a linear relationship. So the research is directed towards something linear. That's why it's very challenging to write my book, because it's about holistic health. There are so many disciplines that come into play that I could have never written this at a university because no one would have ever supported that. I had to bring a lot of information together. It's holistic, and so you kind of nip at the edges of where you're at, and you have to be able to self-assess and then plug in what you need along the way. And a lot of these Eastern traditions, like you said, are focused on holistic health, how an organism is doing overall, not looking at a specific disease and ascribing a specific thing to blame for that disease. It's a holistic condition. It could be, stress, for example, or a diet, or a variety of things in that case. Yeah, so I don't think we're exposed to it all that much. It is a little different, but with the growth of yoga as it is, I think it's becoming a little more popular.
Except for these stubborn males. Here's something that I pulled right from your work that I really love. It actually correlates fantastically with my trading world, because there's so many great trading strategies that happen to revolve this way. In fact, the owner of the Boston Red Sox made all of his money trading essentially with what I'm about to quote from your work. And you say, do it just because, not for the results or the outcome. And that's essentially saying, hey, have that great process, have that yoga process. If you do the process consistently, you do the right thing consistently, and you just do it because you know it's the right thing to do, just because, then you will get the results. Whereas I think what you were just describing is so many people might say, oh my gosh, my stomach looks, too big, so I will go to the gym, and the only thing I will change in my life is I will now do sit-ups or something crazy like that, where it is a holistic approach. If your stomach looks like a bag of you-know-what, but you're not going to fix it by only deciding to go to the gym and only do crunches and not change anything else in your life. It will never change for you.
That's right. Quite possibly, that could be from some kind of a mental issue, and not so much a lack of exercise, maybe not even your diet.
You're right. And when you say holistic, that opens up Pandora's box to say, hey, you've got to look at the full checklist here. It's not like a surgical strike with some one technique. It's the process. Are you going to follow a complete holistic process?
And just waking up each morning and doing a quick assessment, thinking about what you have going on during the week, what you have going on that day, and how you're feeling in that moment as to what you need to keep yourself. Really, it's about keeping yourself in balance so that you can be conscious. And balance to me is when you are in control. I use this over and over in my book. You're in control of your mind and senses. And in fact, I think I wrote in the concluding chapter that to rethink what power means, and to have power be defined as control over the mind and senses. Because if you have control over your mind and senses, you are all powerful. You
hear it, and I think the hard thing for perhaps people that are hearing you say that without perhaps having practiced, I mean, that's where you've really got to go to experience. Start some way, even if it's baby step. Look, let me give a real practical way for people to think about some of the things you're talking about. Let's talk about stress. I know that I need to go to yoga to control the cortisol flowing through my body. I know it does that for me. I've not studied all the science, but I just, having done it enough, I know this has to be part of my routine. I just have to do it. It regulates stress, if not eliminates, at least in my situation.
I agree, and that's how I approach it too. And I know kind of that I need a certain meditation practice, certain number of yoga practices, and then I also do other weightlifting and conventional kind of HIIT practices also. And I know that I think about the proportions, and because I want to show up as this reasonably collected, person in my life, and especially to my kids. I agree. I sort of say I need, 3 yoga classes a week to sort of get rid of that tension and bring everything down. But in my book, you can do this. You don't always have to be necessarily on a mat, because yoga, the mat practice, the asana practice as it's called, the asana as it was originally defined, as it was originally practiced back when the Yoga Sutras, which is one of the key books in yoga, were created, merely meant to sit. So yoga was shaped to be a practice of the mind. That's why you'll see a lot of yoga stuff in Buddhism that they bring over. It's like the mental practices. So yoga is a practice of the mind to ease suffering in one's life. And asana meant to sit, to find a comfortable seat, to reflect, to contemplate, to meditate. So it was finding your posture, your seat. So when it comes to yoga, there's also pranayama, like I mentioned, breath regulation. You can work with the breath if you become attuned to how you're breathing and how that's connected to your emotions, which it is. Then you can seek to make sure that you're extending your breath, the exhale especially, and having a nice long breath to see if you can calm yourself down, regulate your nervous system downward, thus then, like I said, controlling your mental state or your emotions from there. When you're at work, you're not going to necessarily have a mat to flop down, but you can sit there and do a centering practice that involves breathing for a few minutes. And that's and this will happen faster and faster as you get more experienced at it, and get yourself to a calm place where you know you can be clear and discerning, where the mind is not in a frenzy, and you could feel that the nervous system has calmed down because your heart isn't beating quite so quickly, and your respiratory rate has calmed, your breathing apparatus has calmed. There are ways to take this into your everyday life that doesn't involve lengthening the body through poses on a mat.
As you described something which I know to be true, and I have the experience of using yoga as it's almost a form of medication. Call it magic, a form of medication. And I'm speaking about America right now, but this is true across the world in many, many cultures. There's many problems with substances, whether those substances are alcohol, cigarettes, weed, opioids. The one that's so popular for the mind in the States is, gacking everybody up on Prozac and derivatives of Prozac. It's really amazing to look at your work and to look at the detail, to look at the science behind something like yoga. Not only do you get the mental benefit, but the physical as well too. I think sometimes we all forget what it feels like to be a physical person again. But it's sad that people have been seduced to think, if I just take this magic pill, it will solve everything.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it's near and dear to my heart as well. I think you probably can tell in my book, but I do think that I feel like we've lost resilience as a race, and I'm a Gen Xer, so I think we're both Gen Xers, if it's calculating correctly. I think we're a little more resilient than generations to follow, at least at the moment, because for some reason over time we've become very comfortable with pharmaceutical drugs and then other drugs as a way to escape. We're seeing real problems right now with the opioids, as you know, and other drugs to sort of escape. I mean, we all play around with things when we were growing up and like that. But if you kind of need it, it's as a replacement. I think that it starts with the pharmaceutical drugs. If we're saying that we need these anxiety or antidepressant medications to exist at a young age, as teens even, and as a little older, then we're getting used to this idea that it's okay to be popping pills because I'm not strong enough to do this on my own. This life is too tough. And that sort of mentality didn't exist when I was growing up. I feel like we've lost skills. We've lost some ability to teach ourselves how to cope. And yoga offers a wonderful opportunity to reclaim that control, teach some coping mechanisms, and boost resilience.
Let me put you on the spot for a second. Let's say we were to put a class together. You're going to teach this class. We've got 100 people that are going to come into your class, 100 people that have been on antidepressants for perhaps years, otherwise leading fairly normal lives, but they're taking their little magic crutch pill every morning or night or whenever they take these things. But let's say we took these folks, these otherwise normally existing in society people, but just happen to be gacked up on antidepressants. And we took 100 people and we put them into your class and you had them for 3 times a week. And let's say you had them for a month or 2 or 6 months. At the end of 6 months, what percentage of people do you really think would feel the need for those drugs still?
Oh, that's a tough question. I mean, there could be real needs there.
Okay, but okay, let's put that one aside. I know you're giving the disclaimer, but you and I both know that the vast majority of people are taking these things don't need them.
I mean, 6 months, 3 times a week, and enough. I believe a lot of them would at least cut back. I know that you can't just stop. 6 months is a short amount of time to come off of medications like that. If they start cutting back, they definitely can start cutting back. And I know a lot of yoga teachers, sort of either encourage or they even have relationships with physicians, and they're trying to kind of move that direction. The things that come to mind are that you're bringing people together as a group. One of the leading causes of depression are not feeling our isolation, so we call it sangha. You're bringing community together. People, generally speaking, are nice and supportive, so you're also feeling that aspect. If I were to do a class like that, I might consider making sure that these people are connecting with one another, they're getting to know one another. So I would do other things than just the actual yoga practice itself, which to me is yoga as part of life, making sure they're starting to meet one another, connecting with one another. I would teach them, how to assess their inner state and how to breathe. That would be important. The people who study yoga therapeutically in the depression world focus on back bends, so opening up the heart. So you're opening up the front of the body. This allows you to breathe more fully, opens up the lungs. And in a class like that you're suggesting, I would focus on heart-opening poses specifically.
Oh, what I love about this too, and I'm stealing another line from you here right now. I'm kind of paraphrasing from your work. You've got the 2 different perspectives. You have the life happens to me perspective and the I make my life happen perspective.
Right. That's one of the maxims on a chapter, yes. So that's about manifesting your experience. I know that if you spend enough time in self-study, as we call it, or self-reflection, which in my book I talk about examining your perspective, your worldview, your beliefs, and really examining them, and I have exercises in there so that you can assess whether those beliefs, worldviews are helpful or are hurting your health and well-being, your ability to engage and connect with others, just by the self-awareness piece alone. And to me, yoga is all about self-awareness. It's a big part of raising consciousness is becoming more self-aware. And if you become more self-aware, just by becoming aware, you'll start to shift.
Define awareness for the audience. When you say self-aware, what do you mean by self-aware exactly? Give some examples.
By knowing what makes you tick, what stirs you up, what calms you down. It's by getting to the root of why you believe a certain thing. Was it because you were taught it by your parents and you don't really have a good reason for believing it today? Or was it because you truly believe it? Or were you taught it by a teacher? Is it something in the news? Is it because your friends do? A lot of times we do something. I guess to give a simple example, coffee. Why do you drink coffee in the morning? I do. You start to become these labels. Well, I'm a coffee drinker. Well, but why? Do you really need it? Have you tried to go off coffee for a while? So most people would say no, but it's like, well, I have tried to get headaches and whatnot. But it's making decisions for yourself for a reason, consciously making decisions.
Being objective about oneself is probably another one of the huge reasons that so many people are on Prozac, because then you don't have to be objective. You just take the happy pill and then you're happy.
Yeah. Instead of changing the life situation, instead of changing the circumstances in life or introducing something else, shifting, spending more time with a friend, less time on social media.
We talked a few minutes ago about stress. I think something that's very interesting about stress, and I want you to elaborate here, stress is contagious. And that could be whether you're in person in a relationship that is a person is really bringing way too much drama in, Or it could be, as you just mentioned, social media. It could be constantly looking at unobjective arguments and debates all day long, of just basically watching people's diarrhea of emotions come out. And it doesn't do us any good to just sit there and absorb, stream of consciousness emotions coming from people that just want to, whatever they feel, they write on social media. Then you're supposed to pay attention. I don't want to pay attention. I honestly don't care what most people's random emotions are all day long. They've lost self-control.
This is a really great point. So thanks for bringing it up. And one of the reasons why I'm directing it to leaders, I think it's a personal responsibility to have yourself under control. And you're right, not just stress is contagious, emotions are contagious, loneliness is contagious, stress is contagious, happiness is contagious. If you're a leader and do you want to infect everyone else around you with the good stuff or the bad stuff? You're right, it is contagious, and it's true, the social media, back to your information point, you're inundated with all of this stuff, a rant that someone is having or whatever their emotions are displaying online. So you're inundated with it. And so you're taking that in also. And then that combined with the fact that these applications are addictive, they hire people to make them addictive. Experts, so that they know that experts on the mind, that they can make you stay on them longer. And then when you do, that contributes to your social isolation. You're not connecting with people in a human, face-to-face kind of way anymore, which is contributing to a lot of the host of problems that we're seeing today. The problems of, we're social animals. Our survival as a species is because we form human bonds with one another. A lot of this is to just bring humanity back, to re-engage with humans, and in the case of my book, and make sure that you're engaging and connecting with your teams properly, so that we can restore this idea that we're human beings again.
You go in that direction for sure, and where you are taking the yoga principles, the yoga guides, and you are saying, hey, have you thought about applying this to your business world? I mean, for me, I look at it just as, okay, how can I take from it? But you do get people to go that direction, because ultimately, and I think people can hear this in you, you do have the analyst thinking. And that's how you've put your work together. It's almost like a guidebook, a cookbook for all these things that we look at in our life that we've been touching on: unregulated emotions, lack of control, physical problems, mental issues, assorted performance issues that we could just go on and on and on about. And what's amazing is all these many hundreds, if not thousands of years ago, people, human beings, figured out ways to deal with this stuff before the little happy pill. So they've got this fantastic process that allows us to deal with all of the modern stuff that's hitting us. It's just up to us, though, to execute. I
tried to write it in a way that it was structured as an approach. So there's the 5, it's a holistic, it's using a holistic framework from a book called the Upanishads, which is one of the oldest spiritual texts of all time, so thousands of years old. It breaks us down to 5 layers. You've got your physical body, your energetic, I'll call it the lower mind, upper mind, or your knowledge body, and your bliss, your happiness. I have, through my own learnings, research, time spent with my mentor, and my own observations of myself and the world around me, came up with the different ways that you can take care of these layers of yourself, and what qualities emerge if you do. My whole preface here is that while some people are more natural-born leaders than others, there is this now knowing through neuroplasticity and other things that we can also change and improve. I'm showing you ways that if you do take care of yourself in a holistic sense, what sort of qualities that are essential to leadership success emerge. What sort of qualities emerge and how that works. It presents a picture, and a CEO validated this in a workshop. I loved hearing him talk about it. What qualities emerge? It's really you're embodying them. A lot of leadership books will list all of the qualities that great leaders have, and that's great. But how do you get them yourself? What do you have to go through in order to show up that way? And it's really about taking care of your holistic well-being. So I've got the 5 chapters that focus on each, that teach you a lot of things. And then it starts with setting an intention to do it. If you don't want to do it, if you're not going to commit to doing it, you're not going to do the work. Because like you said, it's a lot of information. It can be overwhelming, probably best supplemented with some kind of a workshop or an online training of some sort. And then in the end, it's the planning phase. So once you have all this information, it's set. I take it, it's like you have a financial plan every year. You strive to improve upon that so that you're set when you're done working. Well, what about your health care? But what about your own holistic health plan, your well-being plan that keeps you, in a balanced way so that you're showing up your personal best every day. So you're showing up as your personal best at whatever it is that you do, whether you're a leader leading a team and whether you're a parent. I think anyone who's going to read a book like this at some level is into personal growth, and they're humble enough to say, I want to get a little better. And so that's kind of how the book hangs together.
They could just have a simple thought of like, wow, okay, here's a different perspective. Let me compare this to other perspectives. Let me bring something else into my bucket of tools, so to speak. And I can wholeheartedly say that if someone is unfamiliar with the detail of a yoga practice, the what's behind it, the history, all the different pieces that go into this holistic approach, you've done a great job of putting it all together. I mean, it's a heck of a lot of detail. I mean, we've only just touched on a few things today, really, but I wanted to kind of conversationally get people into your thinking and how this came to be. The title is The Yoga of Leadership, a practical guide to health, happiness, and inspiring total team engagement. Tarra, I appreciate you coming on today. Is there a place we can send people to check you out, check out more about the book? They can buy the book everywhere, I assume, yes? Yes,
Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can find it on all the standard places. And then, yes, please, www.tarramitchell, that's TarraMitchell.com. And I really appreciate your time today. You have a wonderful podcast series. I've enjoyed listening to them myself.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Take care.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.